Anne, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Always. Always excited to talk to you, Victoria. Always.
Awesome. For anyone listening who does not know you yet, can you tell just a brief bit about your background and your teaching situation this fall?
Oh, goodness gracious. Okay, let's do the abridged version. I have a background in elementary and early childhood music education. I have quite a few years of classroom experience. Before then, I was a performance person. So I have degrees in trumpet performance, and it was always my life goal to be an orchestral musician. But that changed very, very quickly when I discovered the magic of music teaching, especially to tiny humans. So I switched paths that way and then got very, very interested in music education curriculum and curriculum development and how kids can best learn music and the many different ways that that takes place. So my interest quickly shifted to that and becoming a huge nerd about all things pedagogy and taking as many trainings as possible, going on to do some extended graduate coursework, we'll put it that way, and then now have landed in a curriculum designer role at annacrusick.com and the Anne Krusick podcast, which is where I share lessons and inspiration, and I have programs and stuff for any elementary or early childhood music teacher who wants to be more intentional in their classroom.
So talk to us a little bit about your teaching situation this fall and what you have walked into.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, now I am predominantly in a role with Anne Krusick, and I do a lot of work there, but I still am working with kids with the Spokane Area Youth Chorus. And through that program, I actually founded an early childhood program, and there are additional choirs that go all the way through high school. So it's a pretty comprehensive PK, I would say, preschool. I have some preschool kiddos in my group all the way through high school. However, with everything in our world and the pandemic and COVID-19 and all of those things, we are virtual for the foreseeable future, which is a very unusual challenge for many reasons, but particularly with this organization because it's not a school music program. It's something that parents and families pay tuition to be a part of. It is also a choir group, right? So even though my early childhood program has functioned very much like a kindergarten, first grade music classroom in a lot of ways because it's foundational concepts and all that good stuff that we're building as they go on to the other choirs, it's still a choir. And so as we feel for all music teachers, not being able to be in person is like a huge roadblock in and of itself, obviously. Yeah. So for me, that's the first thing. What's really tricky and sad is that, that early childhood group is a big recruiting tool for us because, if they come in at that foundational level, then we're hoping that they're going to stay all the way through. And that group doesn't exist right now because we're virtual. And, that's something that I think a lot of families have a hard time saying, okay, my kindergartner is going to be in front of a screen all day, at least in my area where we live. I think almost exclusively everyone is online, at least in the public school system.
Right.
And so it's really difficult for families to say, okay, my kid's been online all day. I don't want them to go now and have a half an hour to an hour choral rehearsal in front of a computer as well. Definitely. So we've lost a lot just with that. And so that early childhood program is not happening, but I am covering for another one of our artistic staff. I am taking over the next group. So the kind of 2nd through 5th grade group. And even in that choir, I think maybe we only have a handful of kids registered, but a lot of what our mission is right now is to keep it going.
Sure.
Because we recognize that the interaction that's going to be happening is not going to feel authentic to these families that have been part of this organization for a very, very long time, a part of this legacy. Yeah. But we still want to have that connection with students. We still want to be making music and connecting musically with students. And so we're doing that through a virtual format. My group is doing a once a week meeting, and usually the rehearsal would be an hour, but it's only half an hour. And then we're alternating that with a digital folder of resources that they can go through at their leisure, I guess you could say, so that there's still that connection and there's still something happening every week, but the only like face-to-face component through a screen live is once every other week.
So you have this elementary chorus, and once a week they are jumping online to do something with your organization. So one week you'll have a synchronous Zoom rehearsal. Is that what you're describing?
Yeah.
Okay. And then the next week, it's like they have a portfolio of options that they can kind of work through on their own. Okay. I think that's valuable for people to hear that, your situation is not a public school music teacher. You're in a private situation, but there are a lot of music teachers who have some of the same concerns that you have as far as program advocacy right now, and how do we advocate for the arts even in a public school setting, and certainly in a private school setting. I know that that's something that music teachers across the globe are thinking through. Like, what does it look like to advocate for my program right now during COVID-19?
Well, and the thing is that when all this went down in March, it was right after our third concert. So we have 4 concerts a year. So we were about to go on our last concert cycle. And it was funny because when everything got shut down, I was actually with the artistic staff at the regional ACDA conference. Like, we were at a concert and they came out and said, everything's canceled, go home because everything's shutting down. It was bananas. And we kind of, not really knowing the severity of it, as many of us were unsure at that point.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
We went out for a drink and we just started talking, and we were like, well, what are we going to do? It's like, oh, well, we can't be virtual. Like, that's going to feel horrible. We're just going to have to be done for the season. And so we were, and we haven't had contact with these kids since that concert.
Yep.
But when things rolled around, I remember having conversations with my husband, and I was just like, what's going to happen? Like, how can we do this? Like, so many of us were thinking. And when we all got together and talked, it's like, well, we can't just not have this. We can't just not do it because this is kind of the way it is until otherwise notified, right? And so we have to figure out ways to innovate, to get intentional about what we're doing, even though it's a different medium, and even though we can't sing together as a choir, and that's really hard on Zoom, right? Like, you can't have everybody unmute themselves and feel like they're in a choir. It just doesn't happen. I mean, there's definitely other ways, and we're exploring all of those, but it's definitely a huge roadblock. But we have to do it. We have to do it for that connection, not just so that the program goes on, but so that these kids have something that they can look forward to musically and be a part of. So.
Right. So your first reaction was, well, we can't have choir online. And then after a while, a couple months go by and you're like, we can't not have choir.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So it's like your gut reaction is like, well, we can't do it that way. But then a few months go by and you say, oh, but then we're not doing it at all. Okay, actually, yeah, I was wrong. We can do it this way. It won't look the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because and I think the reason that it wasn't like, oh, we can't do music ed online in a meaningful way. It's just like, oh, it's going to be different. And so since it's going to be different and nobody likes change, it's, and there's so many questions that come up with that. And there's so much that's gained from that in-person music making experience that I think that's where our brains automatically go. And, then it's kind of taking a step back and thinking, okay, what's the essence here? It's feeling like you're part of a group. It's having a connection with your students. It's being that musical mentor, if you will. It's creating opportunity for students to explore their own musicianship and do some things with music fluency and music literacy along the way. And yeah, as a choir, it's doing that in a group setting, and having that acoustic singing experience is a huge part of that, but it's not the only part of it. And so it's kind of boiling things down to, or peeling the onion, if you want to say it that way, into what the real core is of what we're doing. And is there a way that can be accomplished in the meantime?
You touched on this already, but I want to back up really quickly. You described that you are doing completely virtual because the other option was no choir, and no choir is not an option. So you are using Zoom, and then what is your other tool that you're using for that other week where it's not a synchronous lesson? What are you doing there?
So it's just a Dropbox link. And, you know, we've
Don't
only
say
had
just a Dropbox link.
Well, I say that because I know there's like, and I could go off about this. I know that there's so many like tools out there that folks are using and that are out there and amazing and all that good stuff. And even when I work with, you know, teachers in my community, as I know you say, I am all about like the least barrier, or the lowest rather, barrier of entry to doing all of this. Because the goal is not to do like this awesome technology lesson for me. Right. It's to have an awesome music lesson that uses technology. Right. So it's not, I'm a virtual teacher. I'm a music teacher teaching virtually.
Yes.
Okay. And so when I say just a Dropbox folder, I say that because I structure that, what is it? Asynchronous. I always mess them up. The asynchronous lesson as much as I can like the synchronous lesson. And so what I mean by that is I take my lesson flow and I have all of these lesson segments. And when I go to create that Dropbox folder of stuff, I have a document that says start here, right in the title. And it goes through basically my lesson flow. And it says first do this, first, then do that, then do this. And it's basically the core of it are these segments as videos. So every step in what I'm giving them in that Word document or PDF or whatever is watch this video. And then in the video, if there's anything else they need to look at, like a piece of music or like a music mountain, like Solfa Street type thing, like all of that stuff, it says in the video so that they're not trying to figure out which resources go with what. They have that grounding document that basically gives them the layout of the lesson. And then they can go through and order the videos and it's like I'm right there teaching them, or as close to as possible. So and when it comes time, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to clarify for me. So you have like a document that a third grader will click on. And like you said, it's like your lesson plan, right? It's your lesson flow that you would normally do in your synchronous in-person classes, right? And so the student would say, would read like, first, do this warm up. Next, watch this video. And then it's a link to a video of you. Tell me if this is correct. I'm trying to wrap my head around it. It's a link to a video of you like walking them through whatever little lesson segment, like 3 to 5 minutes of some activity. And then you would say, now go do such and such. And so they have like this scavenger hunt lesson plan going on.
Yeah, basically it's not a choose your own adventure, although some of them might make it that way, but it's definitely like their treasure map, if you will. So they open up that document. And even the first thing they go to is a video. So they open the document that says start here, but the first video is like welcome song or opening routine or something that's very, very obvious that they know from that language and our synchronous lesson, that's where we start. And all of the repertoire and the activities in the asynchronous portion are derived directly from the synchronous portion. So it's almost, if somebody who was not a music educator looked at the lesson plan, they would probably think it's the same plan. It's one scaffold above what that core synchronous lesson plan was. It's the next step, or giving them a little bit more opportunity to explore something, to respond to something, and to maybe look at notation where they didn't get to before and all that kind of stuff. But yes, they're opening that document. It says start here. And even in the videos at the end, I say, okay, now we're going to do this. Go click that video, right? And so they can go to the next video, know exactly what they're supposed to do, or exactly what they're supposed to do next, rather. And it feels, my hope is that it feels very much like what we've already done together.
Yeah, so even though you framed this with, it's just a Dropbox link, because I'm not using 37 different tools, right? Even within that, you are still using text and images and video, and you have hyperlinks, and with something, you know, even as you try to simplify, it becomes something for you as you're creating it. I'm sure you are thinking through a lot of different things in terms of media content that you wouldn't in your regular lesson, you know?
Yeah, I mean, from the standpoint that I have to record a video and drop it in and tell them to go to the video and then tell them, right, like the directions, I think is what you're saying, is what makes it a little bit more of a complex process. But what simplifies it in my brain is having that lesson flow that I would be using anyway, and thinking about everything in that plan. I call it a flow, so it's more flexible, but I mean plan. So in that plan, everything, if I think about it existing the way it would in a synchronous lesson, then it's a lower barrier of entry, right? So it's all about like, okay, this is my next lesson segment. I'm just going to press record and teach it. And then whatever it is, unless it's like a hot mess or like my mic didn't work or my dog started barking, or not, even then, you know what I mean? Like, unless there's something crazy that happens, that's what I'm going to use. And so, yeah, it takes a little bit more time, right? It does. Everything takes longer with video, as we like to say. But yeah, I think by having that place to ground me and thinking through it as if it were a synchronous lesson, it helps.
Yes. Yes. The big thing that people are kind of trying to wrap their heads around is, how do I take this in-person lesson that I would normally do? How do I take that and throw it out the window and then start all over with a music class that would work on Flipgrid? And what you're saying is, don't do that. You take your regular lesson flow, you take your regular lesson that you were doing, and you adapt the content there to be virtual or hybrid or in person with a mask or in person without singing. But you're not searching online for lesson plans that don't use singing. Because that's not what you were ever trying to do in this original form of the lesson. You're taking the original form and adapting it so that your intention stays the same, even though a student is now going to click on a video instead of sit in a rehearsal.
Yeah, and it's funny because exactly what you said. It's not going and searching, I can't use singing. Where's a lesson that I can't use singing? It's like, oh, what am I going to teach today? And it's not even thinking, what activities can I teach digitally? It's like, no, what would I actually use in real life in normal times to teach kids how to do this thing? And, you mentioned the singing thing. I was working with someone earlier today and I was thinking, and they were like, oh, I always play this game, but I can't sing. I'm like, well, what's the essence of the game? Well, what they wanted to get at was the different types of locomotor movement. I'm like, well, is there a way that they could, because they are teaching face-to-face. And I said, so is there a type of locomotor movement that you can make non-locomotor and still achieve your goal? And while they were having them do movement to do different rhythms, I'm like, so you can do it. And they're like, well, we can't sing the song. I'm like, but you're doing rhythms, so can you dance the song? And even if you were doing the melody, can you record yourself singing it and then get a xylophone and isolate it? I mean, there's 8 million different directions you can go in. So it's not just searching for lessons that you can only do digitally or that don't use singing. And it's not finding activities that fit your objective that don't use singing. It's taking the stuff that you already know is good and that your kids love. And I think that the more we focus in on what we already know to be good teaching and just how to intentionally innovate that. I keep saying that phrase because the idea is not to do all of the tech. It's to think intentionally. It's to think purposefully about what is happening in your lessons and then what about that is the essence and how can it be altered to fit this new environment, basically.
Right. So if you wake up in the morning and you say, all right, today I'm an apple tree teacher. What do you do? What do you do for a living? I teach kids how to sing the song Apple Tree. Well, that's not what we do, right? And so even when we are singing and playing the game to Apple Tree, there's a reason underneath it that we're doing that. So what's the reason underneath that we're doing that activity? And that is what we can transfer anywhere. We can make that look however it needs to look, we can do that. But if we think my job as a singing teacher of the song and game Apple Tree has been taken away from me, then we are in trouble, right? Because it's true, you can't teach the song Apple Tree with the game that you've always been doing. We're gonna have to look for what comes, what is that founded on? What in your words, what is the essence,
Yeah, No, and so if you're using Apple Tree to find dough, but the kids can't sing, well, can they listen to a recording and you can't sing? Can they listen to a recording of you singing it and use a body ladder to find dough?
Can they use
right?
melodic contour? Can
Yeah.
they? Yeah.
There's other ways. It's not just singing. There's all these different modes of active music making. And, you know, you and I have talked, V, about this, but, you know, people can use body percussion and they can use body ladders and different types of movement, not just for rhythmic concepts. Don't get bogged down that movement is only for rhythm. And there's more than just body ladders that can show melodic contour as well. But there's so many different directions that you can come at things that are not singing games and aren't singing. And there's ways that you can manipulate what singing looks like in your classroom to make it still work and for kids to still have the exposure of that, because that's important, right? I mean, if anybody hasn't known me yet, they would learn very quickly that singing is absolutely fundamental to everything I do in my classroom, always first. And so this year is like especially a pain point, even more so than anything for that reason. But there's ways to work around it. There's ways to innovate and like we've said, get at the essence of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So your situation is you are completely 100% virtual. You have a synchronous time with your students that you're using Zoom for. You have an asynchronous time on alternating weeks, right? Where students are doing their scavenger hunt, their treasure hunt with that Dropbox link. And you've already touched on this already, but I want to be 100% crystal clear. Those are the tools that you're using. But like we were saying, those are not your values. Your value system as a teacher is not Dropbox. You have something else that you're using Dropbox to get at. And when we talk about just virtual teaching, and you could have done a lot of things. You could have done Seesaw, or you could have done Flipgrid, or you could have done Pear Deck. Like there are a lot of ways that you could have taken this new direction for your group. So what are the values that you relied on to make these specific tactical decisions?
So I do want to say that it was not my choice to just use Dropbox, but if it wasn't my choice, or if it was my choice, it would have been my choice, if that makes sense. Because again, I'm thinking about these children who come to me for, you know, kind of a unique experience because it is a private program. For lack of a better way to describe it. And so for me, I want to give them as much music making as possible. And yes, there are some amazing ways to get student responses through different tech mediums, through different apps, whatever those are called. There's many different ways to use that to make a really, really enriching and engaging environment for your kids. And again, that kind of goes back to what we talked about with your toolbox. And, you know, if you're in a classroom and I promise I'll answer your question, but if you're in a classroom and you're teaching like 500 kids and you're having a lot of trouble with engagement, well, it might be time to pull out some of those tools. A Dropbox links with videos isn't going to get at all of your kids probably. But in my particular situation where that's kind of what they're used to that directed instruction model, then that is what's most authentic, I think, for me as the conductor and my students as the musicians. And so for them to have a video where I'm consistently modeling and asking for their feedback, even though I can't hear them, right? And I'm not asking for them to record and submit a video because we don't have that in our program right now. You know, if this perpetuates, that might be something we're doing. But to have them have that type of engagement where it's consistent music making as close as possible to the model that they're used to, that's what I want to get at. I don't want them to have to learn a completely different system because the essence of what we do is singing together. And so I am going to be consistently modeling. I'm going to be referring to the scores that I'm giving them. I'm going to be focusing on fluency and literacy lessons because that is something that can work really well in this virtual format. When we can't do like singing games and some other things that we would normally do in an acoustic environment. And so my values, to get back at your question, is really just thinking about how I can make this experience, this virtual experience, as close and as authentic to what we're used to in normal times. And what can my focus be? My focus can be on singing, and my focus can be on music fluency and music literacy. And so that's how I'm structuring my lessons.
Yeah, I heard you say some really wise things there. One of them is that you want to make as much music as possible. So your first priority is that students are actively making music. And then your second priority is that it is living digitally as authentically as you can make it, a representation of your, like your analog classroom.
Yes. Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
So what are some of the pain points you found with this approach?
You know, I think that like all of us, if you're doing a synchronous lesson, so if I have my kids in a Zoom room, I find that I have them on mute a lot. So the way that which seems really almost counterintuitive, right? And the reason for that is because they're in front of a screen. And so I don't want them, I mean, logistically, it's just a nightmare if everybody's unmuted and you're asking for responses. I get that. But the other thing is that I'm asking for the responses a lot through movement, actually, in the Zoom lesson. So it's a lot of asking them to stand up and to keep a steady beat, to find some objects to keep rhythm, to show me a body ladder, to show me whether something's ascending or descending, if we're talking about a motive, like all of that kind of stuff. And so it's a lot, again, of me modeling for them and asking for them to sing and watching to make sure, you know, you can tell by how their mouths are moving, asking them to sing where they are and finding those things kinesthetically so that I can still assess, you know, even though I'm not reporting assessments, but still take that quick scan and see who's getting it and who's not, and what I might have to go back and rescaffold. But the challenge is not being able to hear them sing or to be able to have everybody do it together. Another challenge, just really in terms of logistics, is every time I ask them to do something physically, I've learned that I can't do that with them. So I turn off my camera and I just sing, because on Zoom there's that lag, and so everybody gets confused and all that good stuff. And I have to, you know, you have to train your brain to, if they're together, they've got it, but you can't rely on how you're singing and whether they're keeping the beat and all that good stuff. The other struggle is, you know, for these itty bitties, we're getting them to, one of our goals is for them to be able to start to read octavos, right? And so a lot of my teaching is by rote, and a lot of what they get in quote unquote octavo form or written form is a melody line. And so even that, though, organized in measures and with bar lines and systems and all that kind of stuff is tricky. And if you're not there in person to help, it can be a tricky thing. But I think overall, I find the success when I think about it, when I end up thinking about both my synchronous and asynchronous lessons very similarly. Because like I said, they're on mute a lot when we're in a Zoom room. And so a lot of what I'm doing is leaving space for feedback and then calling on one student or one singer to unmute themselves and share with everybody. But a lot of it is very, very similar. And I think that that's a positive thing. Because then as they go through that Dropbox folder, their treasure map, they are very familiar with what we've already done. I hope I answered your question. I don't feel like I did. I mean, I think part of the problem is that it just feels so foreign.
Yeah.
Right. We've only done it for 2 weeks. I have my second Zoom rehearsal with them tomorrow. So, you know, at the time of this recording, so we don't start till after Labor Day. And so I've only had one in-person rehearsal. I've only done 1 week asynchronous, but it's something I've been thinking about a ton, and I've been working with other teachers on. And I think that a lot of those barriers, like we're talking about, are not musical, they're logistical, right? And so thinking about, well, I can't hear everybody sing. Okay, but are there other ways that you can get feedback? Because if they are moving their mouths and you see that they're engaged and they're doing something else kinesthetically that you can see on a Zoom screen, you're getting the feedback that you need. And so it's trying to find those ways that, like, yeah, I really wish I could hear everybody sing, but it's more distracting to have everybody unmuted than just asking them to mute themselves and finding other ways to get that feedback.
Right, right. Yeah, I asked you for pain points and you Pollyannaed it. You're like, well, it's kind of painful, but
Sorry.
you can't. Yeah. That was unfair. I should have phrased it. What are some pain points and the underlying good thing that's happening? That's good. That's perfect. That's excellent. And like jokes aside, that's the perfect mindset to have right now of like, I am taking this loss of not hearing everyone sing at the same time so that I can uphold this value of having a really structured, really incredible lesson flow where students are still gaining independent musicianship through these experiences.
And I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent. So the independent musicianship thing is huge. And one of the conversations we had as an artistic staff was like, okay, what is going to be our focus? It's not going to be repertoire. It's not going to be like a 4-part choral piece. It's not going to be like a group number with movement and instrumental, like it's not going to be all of that kind of stuff. Not that those are our only goals, but those big picture things that we think about for our concert cycle. And so the thought was, if we can really use this way of teaching to our advantage to really hone in on some of those fluency and literacy things. And I keep putting those things together because you want to make sure that your students are having the opportunity to experience, notes and rhythms and melody notes in ways that aren't just reading ta and tt, right? So that's where the fluency comes in. But the literacy piece is important, especially in a choral setting. You're going to be asking your kids to read some music and sight read and all of that good stuff. And so we're lucky in that sharing my screen and going through some of those theoretical constructs works really well on a digital platform. How much professional education has gone on for music teachers lately? Because we can do that in a webinar format, or we can do that in an online format. And so something like that requires a little bit more explanation, those things that require a little bit more teacher talk, you can do a lot with in this format. And so we've decided that that's one of the shining spots, I guess you could say rather, for all of this, is that we're really focusing on the independent musicianship as it pertains to our goals for our singers to be really good readers and to have some really good internal rhythms and good audiation for singing and all of the things, right? So we're hoping to really foster that.
Right, absolutely. This fall, for you personally or for your program, if you could have support in any area of your teaching, what could support look like? What would support look like if you could ask for it?
And we've talked about doing this. This might not be exactly what you're looking for. We've talked about having opportunities for students to do things one-on-one. And actually our older choirs are doing that. They're doing like a virtual voice lesson once a week. That's not getting at what I need in terms of like, it's crazy and overwhelming and all the stuff. But I think that something like that, if you could multiply me by however many kids I have, something like that would be support, because then you have all of your kids on the same page and ready to go. And that sheds a lot of light on what you can do even in a virtual lesson. In terms of what could make the situation more successful, I don't know if there's necessarily like an outside force or tool that would make what I'm personally dealing with more accessible. Is that how I want to say that? Because I think I'm fortunate in that what I'm doing is a part-time position and it's very cut and dry. I'm not working with a really crazy schedule. I don't have a ton of preps. I have this group that I'm really focused on, and I have that luxury to do as much as I can for them, and as much time as I have to devote to my planning or whatever else, I can do that. And, I know that many of the teachers we both work with are not in that, or anybody for that matter, is not in that situation. And I'm not really sure what support would look like.
That is the answer that people often give me when I ask that question. And so the question is like, if the universe could give you anything to make this easier, people are like, I don't know, I'm overwhelmed just thinking about how to articulate what I need. Like that question is stressful in itself. And I also think that teachers also just aren't really used to someone asking like, what kind of help could you use right now? And they're like, I don't know. Like, oh, that's not my job. I don't know. I'll just figure it out, you know?
That's exactly it though. First of all, we're not used to being asked. But second of all, I mean, honestly, time. If you could give me like a week where my kids are occupied and I could just get everything, because I think part of the problem with, I think the overwhelm is not the stuff that we have to do. If you really think about it, it's not like preparing the lessons. It's not even using whatever tools you're choosing to use. It's just, it takes so long to get things organized. It takes so long to upload the thinking lessons. It takes so long to do all of that. And so by the time you've actually gone through like things that in a big business would be like a super entry level job, right? Uploading things to the internet. By the time you've done all of that, do you really have the brain space to come up with like these exciting lessons for both you and your kids? Probably not. And so I think in terms of support, if we had a magic wand and could do anything in the universe, it would be time, designated time to sit down and process all of this out. And then someone who can come in and just, you know, enter it all in for us. Like, here we go. We have the process. We have the big, beautiful roadmap. Now you make it happen. I know exactly what this should look like, because I think that if, you know, oh my gosh, I would die if we all were online for forever. But, you know, if we were, we'd have to come up with something like that. And it would be less about surviving and more about like, okay, what does this really need to look like? And then finding ways to have support so that it wasn't just a one-man show, right? You know, there's always that joke about music teachers having to like set up their own sound equipment and all that kind of stuff. Well, that's this on steroids. That's that on steroids. This is that on steroids. I can't talk. Yeah, this is that on steroids. Like, we have to do all of the things, and many of us have never, you know, when I was in the classroom full time, I never used tech. I used Seesaw for like one assessment lesson once a year. I never ever used any tech. And so trying to do all of this, I think it's just all of the brain power that it takes, and then all of the just logistical, clerical almost type of stuff.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you talked about two things, and this is kind of outside the scope of the conversation, but I heard you say something about time, but I also heard you say something about brain energy. And I think that those two things are interconnected, but I think those are separate. I think that it's possible to have a lot of time, but be depleted of mental energy, which I think was what people were experiencing at the beginning of this lockdown, of having all of a sudden a whole bunch of time, but not the mental energy to kind of make use of that in the way we felt, in some cases, like felt pressure to make use of it. And I think that this might be kind of a similar challenge. The way you described it is that there's like a lack of time, but perhaps more of that is a lack of mental capacity, of mental space, of mental energy.
100%. Especially if like the only time you have to plan your lessons is at the end of the day after your kids go to bed and you taught all day. Like, that's a lot. You know, I mean, I do my very best work at 5 a.m., you know, and there's a reason for that, but there's only so many hours. There's only so many 5 a.m.s during the week. Yep. Right. And do we really want to be getting up at 5 a.m.? I mean, that's not the point, but like, you know, you can have all the time in the world, exactly like you said, but to have those really creative moments and those really inspired moments takes a pretty specific set of circumstances, I think, for a lot of people. And I think in a situation like this, it's hard to find pockets of time where you can make that happen.
Right. We've talked about a lot of stuff. A lot of it has been big picture and things to kind of chew on. And then a lot of it has also been really practical. I love the idea of breaking up instruction so that you have a synchronous time together. But then truly, like, the treasure map format of a lesson is incredible. I love that approach. And I also like how you are not trying to reinvent anything that you've done in the past. You're taking what you know works and you're adapting that for virtual, instead of starting with all the virtual tools and possibilities and trying to squeeze music into it. You know, it's a much more balanced and a more musical approach for you personally as a teacher musician and for your students. And where can people find you and keep up with the work that you are doing?
Well, they can go to annekrusick.com, which is in desperate need of an overhaul, but they can go there and find pretty much all the things. The Anne Krusick podcast is there. You can listen any of the places. I'm super active on Instagram at Anne Mileski. And then I also have a Facebook page and a Facebook group that's pretty active as well. So if you head to annekrusick.com, you can get to all of those things. So.
And you have a couple things that you do to offer support to teachers. One of them is the sequencing solution that you offer a few times a year, and I know you just wrapped that one up. What else, if someone is listening to you and they're like, this woman is speaking my language, I want to be values-based instead of like small tech tool-based in my teaching, I'm done with the overwhelm, I'm ready to get intentional about how to make these lessons actually work, regardless of their format. Do you have anything else that teachers could find for support for them?
Yeah, sure. So I actually right now have a free 5-day challenge going on. So if you head to annekrusick.com/challenge, you can find out more about the lesson flow and how I flesh all of that out. It's like a 5-day mini course, totally free, and it comes right to your email inbox.
And for us, you and I, we are recording this on whatever day it is today. How long is your challenge rocking?
For forever.
Forever. Okay, so we can sign up. Even if I watch this video years after the pandemic and the pandemic is over and we have a vaccine and it's like all sunshine and roses, but I still want that lesson flow, I can still sign up for the challenge.
Yeah, there.
Beautiful. And thank you so much for your time. It's always a blast talking to you.
Thanks, Victoria. I appreciate it.